시간에는 왜 그런 현실 세계에 문제가 생기는가 하는 그 원인부터 생각해 보도록 하겠습니다. 왜 그런 현실 세계에 문제가 생기는가?
So why do these problems occur in the real world? They occur because of the fall of the human ancestors. If Adam and Eve had believed in God's word and practiced it and become completed, they would have become true parents. The world of God's ideal would have been completed on that foundation. If that perfectly completed world had come about, it wouldn't be the same world that we see with all the problems we have today. Because of the fall, that's on. Because of the fall, Adam and Eve became false parents and not true parents. They formed a false family. The world of evil came about on earth and in heaven, and problems came about. Human beings are born from false parents. They cannot solve the problems resulting from the fall. Why? It's because human beings born as the descendants of the fallen Adam and Eve have lost the true relationship with God. They lost the true God. They are born centered on Satan, who is false. This is why human beings became orphans who require the true parents. Because true parents came and established the holy marriage, it became possible for the first time since creation to initiate the true parents' ideal and bring about completion of the ideal of creation. However, it was only after true parents fought against myriads of Satans on earth and in the spirit world that the vertical and horizontal 8 stages established by the false parents could be restored through the principle of indemnity, and Satan could be victorious, subjugated naturally. It was only after this that true parents could actually appear and God's ideal of creation could be completed. And this is the declaration of Foundation Day. So the satanic world is centered on Satan. Adam and Eve fell because of illicit love to become false parents at the very beginning of the satanic world. Therefore, the world of God's ideal of creation is centered on God, and through OSDP, absolute sex education, has to be done according to the true parents' teaching. So all the world's problems will be resolved centering on true parents, and the ideal world of Chanuguk will be accomplished. That's the most important reason why we need to study the original substance of divine principle. In other words, because Adam and Eve fell, that's why we have problems, became the fallen world. If they had believed in God's word and accomplished the ideal of true parents and achieved a true family, then they would have accomplished God's perfected and completed ideal of creation. We wouldn't see the problems. But because they fell, that ideal could not be accomplished. They fell, became false parents, established a false family, resulting in a false world that we have today. So, the true parents need to come and to digest and resolve all the issues created by the false parents. No one else can do it. Only the true parents can do it. People who are born of Satan cannot resolve the issues in Satan's world. So a true parent needs to come and bring Satan to natural surrender and then show us and teach us what is the true standard of creation. So why does the true parent need to come? Because Adam and Eve became false parents. Therefore, unless the true parent comes, the problems established and created because of the false parents cannot be resolved. So, therefore, all the problems in the world have been evolved from those false parents in eight stages, both vertically and horizontally. So, beginning from the servant of servants position, the servant's position, then the adopted son, son through a concubine, adopted son, true son, father, king, and God's position. As Satan digested and took control of all of these 8 stages and created the fallen world on all these different levels.
개인적으로는 굴복했지만 가정이 남아있고
So even if Satan is conquered by Jesus, for example, on the individual level, Satan needs to be conquered on the family level, on the clan level, on the national level, and so forth.
양자이자 서자의 이런 가정의 종적인 파탄을 또 거쳐야 됩니다. 사탄이가 거짓 부모가 그렇게 만들어놨기 때문에
Because Satan, the false parent, created these things on all these 8 levels. So it has to happen on the horizontal level as well.
추구하는 그 본연의 국가자리가
On the national level, for example, the original ideal needs to be restored through the offerings of indemnity and restored by the true parents. Same on the world level, same on the cosmic level. Only by accomplishing this restoration on all of these levels can God be truly attended and then brought into creation in his true position.
이것이 복귀 원리를 통해서 우리 인간들이 가야 될 길이라고
This is the path that we need to walk through the principle of restoration through indemnity.
그래서
So we're going to go into detail on that.
그냥 이루기 시작한 종적으로 발달게 행적으로 되어 있는 것도
So everything that was established through the false parents on the 8 horizontal levels and the 8 vertical levels need to be resolved through the true parent.
시간이 있어. 그것이
And there's a time period in which this needs to be accomplished.
신년을 맞이할 때까지 요 내용을 완결해야 될 것입니다.
This needs to be resolved for within 50 years of
그래서 하나님을
true parents.
말씀을 듣고 예배하기 위해서 일주일을 다녀서 안식일로 정하고 있습니다.
This needed to be accomplished by the Jubilee year of true parents' holy marriage.
안식이라면 7년을 통해서 오늘 안식년으로 알고 있죠.
Right, we know through the Old Testament there is such an ideal as the Jubilee, which was held once every 7 years, and everything was brought, all the debts were forgiven, everything was come on the Sabbath year, yeah.
7년 동안 제자들에게 교육을 다 했기 때문에 이제 또다시 1년 동안 주어서 또 공부할 수 있는 그런 지식을 그런 준비를 해가지고 다시 그 교수 지자로 돌아오고 있습니다. 이것이 오늘 우리가 알고 있는 7년
So, 7-year time period that Father established leading up to that Sabbath year.
10년을 7번 거쳐서 7천 49, 49년이나 50년 될 때에 신년이라고 그랬습니다. 모세오경에 보게 되면 안식일도 있고 안식년도 있고 신년도 있습니다. 그런데 역사에 안식년을 맞이한 사람은 아니지만 신년을 맞이한 사람은 아무도 없습니다.
I'm a bit lost.
파란 세계 부부가 결혼해서 70년, 50년 산 사람이 많죠. 그러나 그들은 하나님을 중심한 그런 나라를 맞이하고
No one in history has had the God-centered Jubilee year. There are people who did that in history, but those were centered on Satan. But in the secular world, this is called the golden anniversary of a golden anniversary. And then the true parents had to accomplish everything before the Jubilee year. So for 50 years, they had to do this. So in 2010, the 50th year after the parents' wedding, that is when it had to be done. So Father declared this 2010 to be the Jubilee year, because our true parents came, and then centering on the true family, then they went to the vertical and horizontal 8 stages, and declared that a realm of victory, and Satan was also was subjugated before our true parents. And so our Father then declared the Jubilee year in 2010. And so then he declared the words that were about that victory. So then 2010, as the same time as the 50th wedding anniversary, it was also the year in which he restored through indemnity everything that about Jesus and everything. And and that was and it was 1950, October 14th, that he was liberated from Hongdam, and then he was in Pyongyang for 40 days to gather his disciples again, and then to start his journey to the south. And so then, Father, at that time in 1950, his disciples, there was one disciple who was injured, and then he took him on his back to the south, and also on a bicycle. And then, so the 2010 was the 60th year after that experience. So that the 60 years, during those 60 years, he indemnified in all of the 6,000 years of history. And so biblical years, of course, and then, so he had to restore through indemnity the number 6, and Father could not spend 6,000 years doing that. He could not spend 600 years doing that, and so in his physical body, could not be in his physical body on earth for that long period of time. So he was able to compress that 6,000 years into 60 years, and that was completed in the year 2010. At the same year, that was the 50th anniversary of his marriage. And so two things then, he was able to accomplish all the false things that the false parents made, and also to indemnify all of the satanic things in history. And so 2010 was the year then from he declared that to be the first year of Cheongi, and said that in 13 there would be the foundation day in 2013, and 3 years later he said. So 2010 has that kind of importance. The Cheongi is what we call the key of a Cheongi means a foundation, and so represents the foundation of heaven. It is the foundation of heaven's victory, and so that was the original year, was in 2010. That was the first year of Cheongi, and then Father went to the spirit world. Songwise, it was the 3rd year of Cheongi, so it was in the 3rd year of Cheongi, September 3rd, and then, but right now. But in the Family Federation, they don't use Cheongi. They are now, since 2013, they declared a Cheonilguk first year, Cheonilguk and so forth. But the Cheonilguk is but the foundation for Cheonilguk though was in 2010, and without the 2010, there would not have been without that this. And so also, without the victory of true parents in 2010, there would have been no way for fallen human beings to go back to God. And so Satan had to be subjugated naturally, and so the way to be opened for us to return to God and to return to true parents. And so this OSDP absolute sex education is the way. Is the word. So the most important thing, the most important reason that we teach the OSDP absolute education is to talk about Father's indemnification of everything. So then, what kind of existences then are the fallen humans? They are human beings have both a good and evil within themselves, and that is unprincipled. Why is it unprincipled? Because every created being can only serve one master, but the fallen human beings serve 2 masters. They can relate to God as the ones who created them, but also because Satan is now our owner as a result of the fall, so Satan can also have that. So fallen human beings can relate to God and to Satan. We are in the midway position. That's why we are an unprincipled existence, unprincipled being. So then, but an unprincipled being cannot relate to God fully, but because God could only relate to principled beings. So there is original sin within our minds, but also there is the fallen nature that came into our hearts at the time of the fallen flames. That is the jealousy and arrogance and anger and those kinds of things come in from Satan at the fall. So these come from our evil mind. In the original mind that God created does not have that kind of thing. So within ourselves, we have the mind, and then within the mind, we have actually two minds. We have the original mind that God created, which goes towards goodness, and we have the evil mind, which goes towards evil. And then within the mind, because we have these two minds, we have these mind of goodness and the mind of evil. And so our bodies move according to the mind, and if our body moves according to the original mind, then we do good deeds, and we feel joy, but if the body receives influence from not the original mind but from the evil mind, then we do evil deeds, and we are dominated by Satan. And then when the body acts according to the evil mind, then we do evil deeds, and that from the from the position of the original mind, that it brings sadness. And so that is why we say fallen human beings are contradictory beings, and we have both the good and evil, and we have original sin. And then that within there should be one mind and one body, but there are actually two minds, and these two minds are fighting. So this is no one in history could not reveal this and explain this. That the fact that these two minds are fighting within human beings. But the Father's word said, He said, even though human beings reconcile, they can become one. Even if they have a war, they can end the war, and they can have a peace treaty and end the war. Even in World War, for example, can have a armistice and treaty. But the war that is going on within each individual, this war has no end. And no one can even suspend this war. No one can say, "Okay, let's stop fighting," and now no one can end the struggle between mind and body. That is a result of this division of the mind, and because we are the descendants of the fall, there's no way for us to end that. So it is only when the true Father comes that Father can end this war within us. So Adam on this earth, he committed sin and came to have original sin. So true parents also must come to the earth and must establish the principle by which the indemnity through restoration through indemnity can be accomplished. And so with that principle, go to the with true parents, and then that is how then Satan can be subjugated. That is the natural subjugation of Satan. So then it cannot be the forced subjugation. Why? Because if it is forced subjugation, then at some time that he's going to rebel against that. And so then the omniscient God and omnipotent God could not end this fight with Satan for 6,000 years, but he had to wait until his Son could appear on the earth, and the Son would establish the principle by which Satan could be subjugated naturally, and then also to act according to that principle in order to go the way of the restoration through indemnity. And so the sin was occurred on earth, so it has to be restored on earth. And how does that happen? We can, but there has to be indemnity conditions involved in there. Otherwise, even if we are blessed, if we go to the spirit world, we will not be able to live so freely in spirit world. So look at the messages from spirit world. they thought they lived well on the physical world, but they had the fallen nature. And so when they go to the spirit world, they met Father and they received His holy blessing, but they cannot go near to God, to Father in the spirit world, because they have a certain sign. They're wearing certain kind of a sign on themselves around their neck. And it's that. And then the name of their crime, the name of their sin is written on that sign that is around their neck. So a thief or someone who did illicit love or something like that. It's written on the sign, and they cannot take that off. So that has to be taken off on the earth. But they no longer have a physical body, so they can't. And so then they're the children who are on earth then have to pray about that, and then to establish the conditions, and then if that is sufficient, then that signboard is taken off of their bodies. So that is true liberation. That is the true complete freedom. Do you understand? And so liberation and a complete freedom is there for that reason. So then some people, if they didn't understand that, didn't know about that, then they can live with that. But now that once we know that, we must live with the absolute determination that we will not live this way. That is why we are learning this now. So we must become people who can live that way. And so our thoughts, must lead to judgment, to decision, and that decision must lead to action. And so now that today you are hearing these words and you make realizations, then you must make a determination, and to put this into practice in your daily lives so they can bear fruit in your lives. So then, among our fallen human beings, St. Paul said this, looking at Romans 7:17 to 25. There are two laws within me, he says. And he is a very famous person, and he was a Jew, but he had a Roman citizenship, and he was a very learned in the Old Testament, but he related to Jesus in terms of the law. And he looked at Jesus, but Jesus wasn't right according to him. So he thought Jesus was a heretic. So he looked at Jesus as a criminal, and so because Jesus was going against the law, and so then Jesus deserved to be executed. He thought, and Jesus was executed on the cross, and so then Saul supported that, but then afterwards, Jesus resurrected and met Jesus for 40 days, and they were spiritually resurrected, and they went to many places around the Mediterranean, and they would be killed if they were caught. Sometimes they'd be fed to the lions. Sometimes if they were crucified, the disciples of Jesus were killed in this way, and then. They would be put in the stadium, and then the hungry wild beasts would be let loose to eat them. This was what happened under the Romans, and so Paul was going around capturing these disciples to these believers, and he would have this authority to do this. But then he met Jesus. On his path, he heard a voice. And then what was that voice? So, Saul, why do you persecute me? He heard someone say that. And then already, there's a light from in front of him, and he saw this light, and he could not see in front of him, and he collapsed on the ground. He could not go any further. But he heard a voice behind him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And he heard that, and Saul then said, who is it that is calling to me? And then the voice says, who is it that is? It is the Lord Jesus, who you are persecuting. And he was very, so he said that he is the Lord. And he said that Saul thought that he was the false Messiah and nailed him to the cross, but he said that he is the Lord. And so then Jesus also told his disciples about Saul, that he collapsed and could not see, and told them to go and find him and to put him in a room so that he could recover. And then until then, Saul thought that everything he was doing was good, because what he was doing was correct according to the law. But the result was that it was a huge crime, a terrible crime, because he killed the Messiah. And then he even went around capturing the disciples. But then he met Jesus, and then he sat. And how did I come like this? How did I become like this? I thought that what I was doing was right, but actually it turns out that I was doing what was the worst crime. How did it happen this way? And then he was able to see spiritually, and then Saul then wrote a lot of books in the Bible, and the book of Romans, though, is the most important one that he is. And this is a very difficult book to lecture because he said that the God laments, human beings lament, and creation laments, as in lamentation. And he went also to the paradise. He didn't know where it was. He had experiences that he didn't know where it was. And so then Saul, so within me there are two laws within me, he said. There's the one that there's a mind of goodness that goes towards heaven, but there's another mind that pulls down the mind of goodness and makes me do evil. So then, and so he saw this through his spiritual eyes, and then he cried out, say, "Oh, now I see, but I see another law in my members." Then he understood this. "O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death?" So who will deliver me from this body of death? So who can deliver me? So only Jesus Christ our Lord. And he confesses his faith in Jesus at that point. And then he becomes a spiritual disciple of Jesus. And then he has to go back to Rome then. And then he has to take a result when he goes back to Rome. And he has become a disciple spiritually. So what is he going to do before he goes back to Rome? He must have been worried about that. And also, Jesus was the Messiah, and yet he killed him on the cross. So how is he going to testify to Jesus? And so then because he was the law expert in the law, so he explained this in terms of the law. And so in the book of Isaiah, it says that Jesus would come with in Isaiah there were two prophecies, always about the coming Messiah, and always the prophecies in the Bible are two. So whether he could be he may come as the Lord of glory as one prophecy, but the other is that he will come as the suffering Lord. So Saul looked at these two, and so how could Saul explain Jesus then? And so he thought this way. He decided this way, that the crucifixion of Jesus, this was to he did this to pay for the sins of fallen humanity, and the blood that Jesus shed was shed for the sins of human beings. So there could be no salvation. There could be no salvation without the cross, and that is so. But already, because the Lord of glory could not be explained, and so he put his emphasis on the Lord of suffering. And so today, Christianity is not the church of Jesus; it is the church of Paul. So so Paul's theology is the basis for Christianity today. So then, today, when everything that we are, most important thing is how we live in this physical world. And so Saul, later on, he was not a disciple when Jesus was on earth. He was not an apostle. But look at the books that he wrote. In the beginning, he always called himself the Apostle Paul in the beginning of each book that he wrote. So he is the self-proclaimed apostle. So because no one else would call him that way. So he decides, I was a disciple, I was an apostle. So in the beginning of every book that he wrote, he says, I, Apostle Paul, Paul the apostle. So he is the self-proclaimed apostle. So he wrote 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. And then he is today established the Christian cultural sphere. So one person's thought, one person's thinking, one person's word, one person's logic, this has had this incredible influence in the world. So if a mother talks about the only begotten daughter, and even the scholars around her are now explaining that logically and scholarly, so based on their own thoughts, and if that thought now remains, then in the far future, then what will the future people say about this? This is very serious. So then that is why we just wait a while, she'll quit. Well, no, that's not right. That's not right. We cannot just wait like that. So this is a very serious situation right now that we are in. So how are we going to overcome this? That is our issue. So then, this is a fundamental issue because it comes from not knowing about God, not knowing about true parents, and not knowing about the words and the principle that true parents established. And because we ourselves were not able to establish that. Because even if people have been ministers for 50 years or 60 years, they are wrong when they do this. Not Father's words, and they're not using Father's words, and not the principle, then it is wrong if it's not Father's words or the principle. In 1976, Father did the Yankee Stadium rally in the United States. I was a minister then in Amapo in Seoul, and at that time, every night we had a candlelight prayer for the success of Father's rally in the United States, and we were doing 40-day prayer conditions for an entire year, and many people participated and many people prayed at that time. So then one person, even one person was relaying to us Father's words. This is spiritually, this is what Father's doing now. This is who he's meeting right now. They could just see that through, and they would sort of give us a running, just like a play-by-play sports announcer. This person was telling us about Father's every move. And Father gave us many instructions at that time. And one thing that he said to us then, he said that when at the end there will be a lot of spiritual phenomena. Also, this says what it says in the Bible, that in the end of the days there will be people will dream dreams and see visions, and there will be many people will have spiritual experiences. It says in the Bible, but then when these occur, when a person with a spiritual, when someone, for example, has a spiritual ability to bring dead people back to life, that might even happen. So then, but if that happens, we have to actually believe it. But if that person, if such a person speaks something that is not of Father's words, not of principle, then we cannot follow that person. If that person, for example, can bring someone back to life, we have to accept that reality that they actually did that. But if the words they say are not Father's words or not principle, we cannot follow that person. That was the important thing that Father told us then. So and if that person, for example, if a person who he saved my life, but still, if the words that person speaks, if the actions of that person's are not according to Father's words or the principle, then we must not follow that person. And this is the standard that we must keep today. We must not lose Father's words. We must not lose the principle. That is the standard of our value judgments today. Wherever we are, is this a principle? Is this Father's words? Is this correct providentially? That content, if that is not true, then we must not follow. And please be very clear about this in your hearts. And so Saul also stood in that position, and he was in confusion for a time, but once he placed Jesus Christ in his center, he came to understand himself, and he came to understand what he had done wrong and what he needed to do. But he explained Jesus according to his thinking. In 1 Corinthians 8, he says, this knowledge, no one can know this, but if they had known this, they would not have killed the Lord on the cross, he says in that verse. So then if he understood that, then he should have. But he says though that the cross had to happen, and that the cross was necessary for salvation. So if he understood that in 1 Corinthians, that Jesus should not have been crucified, and yet he based his salvation on the necessity of the cross. That was Paul's mistake, and that is why Christians today call us the heretics, because we don't have the cross. We see, but that is wrong. That understanding of the cross is wrong. For 2,000 years, one person's logic, one person's thinking has brought this kind of a huge, terrible situation. So we cannot write books just willy-nilly. So I also, when I have preached many sermons, and I have collected many sermons that I've given. One time I was going to publish these as a book, but I saw a situation for one professor wrote a book and took it to Father and asked him to sign it, and he took it and threw it, and he just threw it aside. He tossed it aside. He said, "This book that you wrote, if this is a book that you wrote based on your own thinking and not based on God's thinking and the principle, then it will just bring confusion in the future." So then that made me realize that I should not publish my book, because if this is not Father's words, then it will cause a huge problem in the future. But I do have to write my autobiography, how I lived. Father has given us that permission to write these autobiographies, so I do have to write that before I die, because that will be my standard when I go to the spirit world. But I cannot lie there. So the autobiography is necessary. And Father also wrote it, an autobiography. So then you too must be preparing to write your autobiography. So this is not just one thing something that happens in one day. You have to collect things along the way and then write that. And so we're just following along and thinking that everything will work out, but now we see that that's not the case. So if everything is prepared, then it's easy to write an autobiography. But if you're not prepared, if you haven't been collecting things, then it's going to be difficult. So then when you're alive, you have to record your actions in your life. So then there are two laws within ourselves. And John 1, and we looked at 1 John 1, 8 through 10. It says that if we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, He is faithful and just, and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. If we claim we have not sinned, we make Him out to be a liar, and His word is not in us. So He says that we have sin within us, and we are sinned. Just because we believe in Jesus doesn't mean we have no sin. Do you understand? So here, So I saw one young Catholic man, and he said that he's saved. How? I asked him how he was saved. Well, he said, "Well, I was baptized, and I received communion, so I have no sin." He said. So they think that they have no sin because of all this. So then we have sin though, and we are sinning. We need to understand that. And if we say that we have no sin, or if we say that we are not sinning, then we are lying, and we also make God into a liar. That is what we will be doing. So today, everyone has sin, and so in Romans 3, it says that there is no one righteous. This is Romans 3:10-11, and not even one. No one is righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. So everyone thinks that we are righteous. Many people think they're righteous, but from God's perspective, there's not a single one who is righteous. And so then, in Thessalonians 5:17, it says to pray without ceasing, and then so that we are not invaded by Satan. We always have to have very serious prayer to God so that Satan cannot invade. We must always be thankful, and we must always be joyful. We have to have that kind of heart. This content is. This is because human beings have this kind of aspect, and so they cannot go back to God. So because Satan will attack us, and so then how are we going to do that? So then we have to understand clearly that we have two minds within us, and then when our body moves according to the mind, and it may move according to one or the other. And if it follows the good mind, we could do good deeds. And also there is a desire within us. We want to do things. We want to accomplish certain things. We have a desire, but also if it is a desire that comes out of the original mind, then it brings us goodness, and it brings us a joy and happiness. But if that desire comes from the evil mind, then the result will be unhappiness and evil deeds and sadness. And so in the Bible, it says that if a sin is conceived, it says that if a desire is conceived, then we give birth to sin, and if that grows up, then that will become death. It says so. Desire is something that originally comes from God. But if it becomes something evil and self-centered, then it seeks after things that are evil, and so then it is born as a sin, and it leads to death. And so then we are descendants of a fallen world, and so that is the situation that we are. And we need to understand that is the being that we are. And so how are we going to? We'll start studying now. How are we going to get rid of that? So then we are now ignorant, both spiritually and so what did we lose? We lost God. We are spiritual and external ignorance. We lost the reality of God. There is no mention of true parents in the Bible. And Father said, if Jesus had used the word true parents and had said that true parents had come, then Father would not have had to suffer nearly so much. But there's not mention of that term in the Bible. But there's one evidence of that in the Bible, and I will explain about that when I give the principle of restoration. And then the spirit world, we must go to the eternal world, but we don't know the spirit world. And we have the portion of responsibility, but we don't know what our responsibility is. And that responsibility is important. And then next is there is a purpose of creation, and we must live according to our principle of our purpose of creation in order to become people of goodness and people who people who do that can have families that are true families, and there will be no sin there. If there is a sin, then they must get rid of that sin and go back to that. But there was necessary to always, if there is sin, must always establish indemnity conditions to go back. But the people don't understand this, and so Christians think they would just have to believe in Jesus and they'll be saved and go to the kingdom of heaven just by believing in Jesus. But there is no one who is testifying to Jesus correctly. This is something that Christians would be very shocked to hear, but this is true. So then, now there's the ignorant human beings who don't know about the spirit world. How can we follow Father's words that enlighten us to that? So then our hearts, our minds have fallen into ignorance. That is both a spiritual ignorance and an external ignorance. And spiritual ignorance means we don't know the reality of God. Even the Christians who believe in God don't really know about God, and he exists on his own, and he exists as a spirit. He gives judgment, and this is how they think about God. Of course, these are some aspects of God, but we cannot say that we understand God just by understanding those aspects. And they don't understand the 심정 of God. They don't know the circumstances of God, and so they don't know if God is sad or joyful. They don't know whether He is lamenting, and He doesn't know whether He is in glory or not. These are then human beings. In what relationship with God were we born into, and how do we need to live, and where do we go after life? So the purpose of life, these issues are most important for human beings, but we are ignorant of them. And then next, our values. What is good and what is evil? What is true and what is false? What is the truth and what is the false? What is the false? So this kind of ignorance, religion was established to teach people about these things and to develop people's awareness of these things and knowledge of these things. And religion is necessary to teach our spiritual ignorance. But then we also have external ignorance, and this is about the nature. And so that talks about what is the fundamentals of the universe. And the world we live in is made of matter, of material, and so we need to understand that. So scientists until now have talked about this from electrons to from atoms, and they've also subatomic particles, and understand that actually if you go down below subatomic particles, it's energy, and so physicists who study this find that the fundamentals of the universe is energy, but there's energy also that has some kind of function, and so then the science is thinking, well, what is this that is behind energy? Then some people begin to suspect that there is something similar to what the Christians believe in as God, and so science explains the external world that God created. One medical doctor, the medical doctors are people who study the human body, and we have different experts, the eye expert, the head expert, even the hand and feet experts, and then so there are many. We can become a medical doctor, an MD, just by studying a certain portion of the body. Then there's the brain, and then the brain controls the nerves and the circulatory system, and if something goes wrong there, it would be paralyzed. And so if one thing goes wrong, it influences the entire body, and that is the structure of the body, and it's more precise than the computer. And when we go to the hospital, we say, "Oh, I hurt here, just one place," but it also affects other parts of the body. So God's way of treatment is to treat the whole body. So it is a comprehensive treatment that God gives in His hospital. So that is the original human being that God created. So what is the fundamental of the material world? And there's laws in the nature. It's springtime, and all the trees that lost their leaves before the winter came are now budding new leaves, and then those leaves come out, and then they fall again in the autumn, and then winter comes, and then the following year, with certainty, those leaves will come back, and no one can stop that kind of cycle. So also, human beings also live according to these laws of nature, and so then So how were these laws of nature established? Who made it this way? Did they come out just naturally? No. So then, this kind of content is where we discuss the fundamental of sciences. And as the science develops more and more, we understand more and more about the universe. And the science is in charge of doing that. That is their responsibility. So, religion then enlightens us for the spiritual ignorance, and the science enlightens us for our external ignorance, and they come together will come together to bring a unified and happy human being. So, one deals with the world of essence, one with the material world, and so how can these be brought together? And so the scientists today say that this cannot happen because for the essence and material to come together, for mind and body to come together, for the incorporeal world and corporeal world to come together, this is something that the religious people can talk about, but scientists have to say that this can never happen. So how can religion and science be unified? This is right now, it's only imagination. How can it actually happen? But right now, today, are revealing and teaching us a bit different aspects of the truth. But mind and body should be together. So within the body there is a mind, but these were separated as a result of the fall, and they came into a struggle. And so, in order to accomplish this, God established the religion, and these have to be unified. And so, how are these to be unified? So, the Toynbee said this: that the religion must all have to be based on science. So, he said that religion without science is incomplete, but also he said that the science cannot deny religion, because the science without religion, he said, was blind, because the religion gives the goal and the purpose. But so the religion and science must be able to become one. But in reality, though, they say that it's very difficult for that to because one. Can these become one? But in God's providence, they must become one. So then, to become one, there has to be a new principle for that to happen, and then that is the unification principle, and then the true Father has brought that principle, and so by that principle, religion and science can become one. By one person will one God created both the spirit world and the material world, and so they have to become one. And so the Son of God has to come and reveal the fundamental principles of creation, and then based on that, religion and science will absolutely become one. We'll talk about this more later on, but this religion has this of science is. Science has given us a new environment for us to live, and economics comes from that. So, what is the relationship between economics and religion? This is a difficult relationship, and politics have been established as well. We have politics, and so religion, politics, and the science and the economics, and so we need to resolve the relationships between these. So this is whether this is a democratic world or a communist world, whether it's a totalitarian world or a democratic world, whether it's an imperialist world, or whether it's a capitalist world, or whether it's a socialism. So whether it's a market economy or whether it's a regional economy. So then this is what people are fighting about, and this is especially very severe in Korea, and in the political sphere, and in the religious sphere, and in the scholars are all arguing about this in Korea, but they're not able to resolve this. So this can only be resolved by the new word that the true parents bring, and the principle that true parents bring. And so then we are now studying that word, and so then the OSD. That is why OSDP. Is the word that was given to us to resolve all the problems in the real world. And so there is nothing that cannot be resolved by these words. And so that is why this OSDP is necessary. So Father said that the leaders, the rulers of the world will have to learn this original substantive divine principle and absolute to sex and receive this education. And the second generation, third generation will all have to understand and learn these words of the original substantive divine principle and absolute sex, because this teaches about God, it teaches about true parents. And most important, the center of this, the core of this, is the center of this, the lineage of the center of this. That is why this is absolutely necessary. So this education must take place from the leaders all the way down to kindergartners, and must all receive this education. Otherwise, this world will be destroyed. So then,
so fallen human beings exist in two different states. So in the final stage, religion, politics, and economics. In these three different fields, the question is, how can God's ideal world be created through these three areas? What direction does politics need to go? Because the coming Messiah is the King of Kings. So what kind of nation will it be that the King of Kings establishes? What kind of government? What kind of economics? That's the basic content that we need to teach through the principle. So we need to remember that this is the situation and state of fallen human beings. So what about religion and science? Religion deals with the spiritual situation and reality. So philosophy has the role of illuminating and testifying to God. It's a field of learning, testifying to God, and the root of the universe. Does that world exist? What is the relationship between God and human beings? What is the relationship between God and the created world? What is the relationship between human beings and the created world? This is the issue of relationship that philosophy needs to teach about and deal with. For that reason, in philosophy, the basic foundation is God. Needs to reveal and understand God as the root of all things and the root of the universe. So, theology is an academic area that deals with talking about God. So there was a great theologian, came from Harvard, met with Father, and he said to Father, Father is testifying to God, but that world-level theologian said, I don't believe in God. He said he was an atheist. Father was surprised. So that theologian said, well, I'm studying God from an academic viewpoint, but I don't believe in God. And that's how academics can talk today. In Korea, for example, there is the new President Moon in Korea, came from Korea, came to Australia, to America. Is that really what an academic is? So I'm very sorry to say this, but you know, I'm not trying to point out that that person was wrong, but we have to understand clearly what the reality is. So we need to attend God and find out what is true. So what about religion then? The purpose of religion is to teach us about what kind of lifestyle it is to attend God. How do we live with God? So the question is, in the original world, there's no need for religion. But fallen people do need religion. So what is the state of religion in the world today? The problem is that in the world today, religion is unable to fulfill its responsibility. Why? Just like everybody else in the world, the problem is that they put too much emphasis, religions in the world today put too much emphasis on the next world, and therefore, with that emphasis on the next world, but the problem is they're living in a material reality, and they're ignoring that. Also, the doctrines that the religions of the world today have are incomplete. They cannot deal with the real world problems and offer concrete solutions. Theoretically, they're not robust enough to deal with those things. Also, religions in the world today are ignorant of God's will and God's providence. They don't understand the direction that God is going. Therefore, they cannot connect with heavenly fortune. So, in many of the religions today, let's consider Christianity. Christianity is the central religion of all religions. Why is that so? Because Christianity has the responsibility to offer human salvation. In fact, Christianity became a world-level religion claiming to offer salvation to all of human beings. They have that kind of desire or ambition to bring about salvation to all humanity. However, the problem is they've lost the fundamental mission of religion. Their purpose is they need to overcome the ignorance of the mind and teach about God's providence, but they're not doing that. So even when the Messiah came, they weren't able to establish the foundation to receive the Messiah. They couldn't receive the Messiah. Christianity is originally meant to become the bride that can receive the Messiah, but they didn't do that. For that reason, they're supposed to give everything they have and offer that to the Messiah, their own life, their own family, their own material foundation. But Christianity was unable to do that.
아버지를 배신하고 신부로서
Rather, they turned their back on Father.
어머니로서 아버지를 배신해버리는 남편을 배신하고 이런
It's like the bride betraying the groom.
그럼 예수께서 하신 말씀이 하나님은 나의 아버지라고 했습니다.
Jesus came and Jesus explained, I am the groom,
아버지와 자식이라는 관계를
you are the bride. Explain that God is my Father, I am His Son.
기독교에서는 그 신앙을 하게 해야 됩니다. 예수님을 가리키는 목적이 어디냐? 하나님의 아들. 우리가 예수 믿는 목적이 어디냐? 예수님같이 하나님의 아들이 되기 위해서, 딸이 되기 위해서.
In order to, the reason why Jesus came and explained that God is my Father and I am His Son is to lead us on the path where we could become the sons and daughters of God. Jesus came as the Messiah, as the Christ. But they don't understand this point, and rather they simply believe that He came to die on the cross and through that accomplish salvation.
또 그리고 주님의 말씀 하나님은 나의 아버지라고 했는데 이 아버지와
Even though Jesus emphasized that God is His Father, Christianity today is unable to explain the nature of that relationship between Father and Son. In addition, they don't understand the correct relationship between the bride and the groom. Because of that, not understanding that basic relationship between the bride and the groom, they're unable to build ideal families.
만민 형제주의라고 예수님 가르쳤는데 그 교리를 가르치지 못합니다.
Jesus
말은
taught that all people are brothers and sisters,
그래서 예수님이 가르친 그 말씀을 바로 가르쳐주고 있지를 못하고 있다고 말합니다.
but Christians are not able to practice the words of Jesus exactly as Jesus taught it.
소금이라고 빛이라고 했습니다. 소금이라는 것은 부패하는 것을 막는 것.
Jesus described his disciples that they had to be like salt, like the light. If salt is used to sanctify and to give flavor to different things, but if salt itself does not have the flavor of salt, it cannot fulfill its original purpose. But what we need today in the world, humanity needs to have that salt.
뭐라고 그래요? 태반 속에 있는 양수가 영분입니다.
When the mother has a baby within the womb,
이런 오해를
then the baby needs to have the placenta in order to receive nourishment.
소금이라 그 말은 무슨 말이에요? 세상을 썩지
Jesus
않고 말이에요.
Jesus told his disciples to go into the world and be salt to the world. What does that mean? That means go into the world, but don't be corrupted by the world. You have to be impervious to the corruption of the world. Teach God's word, teach God's truth. But what's the reality?
교회 안에 들어와 버렸습니다.
But then the things of the world come into the church. Slowly, slowly, the things of the world, the corruption of the world became part of the church. So they're meant to be the salt and light of the earth, but the problem is that they became corrupted. So is God living within the churches?
하나님이 없다는 공산주의가 들어왔습니다.
And when God's not living within the churches, the reality is that communist ideology penetrates into the churches and further corrupting them. Satan comes into those churches.
오늘 이런 내용들을 보게 되는
So when we consider this kind of situation, we have to ask,
세계 종교가 되는
Christianity became a global religion for the purpose of the salvation of all humankind. But if Christianity has been corrupted and is permeated by communist thinking, then can they fulfill that purpose? No. In fact, they'll lead people in the opposite direction.
우리 입을 열면 우리가 아버지 말씀이 참 사랑, 신정세계,
True Father's words, we have to educate people about True Father's words. True love, the ideal world.
그 삶 자체가
But
향락이라고 봅니다.
Christianity is unable to talk about true love and about the ideal world.
오늘 그런 세상이 되어버렸다고.
This is the world we live in today,
세울 수 있는
where we need to establish
얼마나 어렵다고 생각하셔야 돼요.
God's lineage in this world. It's an extremely difficult time to establish God's lineage in the world. people don't have that interest in true love and the ideal.
세우시는데 자녀인들이 아버님 같은 마음을 가지고 다 가면 얼마나 좋겠습니까?
But if all of Father's children had the same heart as Father,
근데 그중에 한 분이라도
then that would have been incredibly wonderful. But
이 땅에서 복된 걸 알아야 돼요.
only one of Father's children was able to do that. Hyungjin them inherited that
그래서 그게 못 갑니다.
mission and heart of true Father. But if he wasn't able to do that, if he didn't do that, we would have been in great trouble.
구할 수 있는 그 중심에 자리에 가겠습니다. 저는 못한 만약 그랬다고 하면 어떻게 될 것 같습니까?
If Father asked you to stand in that central position,
메시아를 또
take that responsibility, what would you do?
아버님 어떻게 하시겠습니까?
What would God do if he asked and that was rejected? If Hyungjin hadn't received Father's request, it would have been extremely serious situation.
아버지를 모시고
However, Father's Son did stand up and said, I will inherit your tradition. I will stand for your will. I will
아무도 없는 자리에서 허업을 통해
become
혼자 하겠다.
your representative on the earth. That's is so incredible. And yet that Son was forced into a situation in the world where he's completely isolated, abandoned by everybody, and has to accomplish Father's will. How difficult. Do you think Father is happy about this? No.
활동을 탈가되고 그렇게 할 수도 버팀목이 되어줬다고 하는 형이 있다고 하는 것이
However, he has Kukjinim, who's supporting him.
희망을 가졌습니다.
And because of the unity and the relationship between these two brothers, we have hope. Today I have hope because of this.
어떤 핍박과 반대를 하면서
So whatever, persecution or opposition I get from those around me, I have incredible hope because of this. That's why I'm here to share this content with you. I don't know when the next time I'll be able to come here. When you agree, this situation and opportunity may not happen again. But in the future, you need to teach this content. You need to share this content with people. If I was able to teach in English, it would be wonderful. But I can't. To a certain sense, it's frustrating because I'm not able to speak English. But today we have interpreting. People here interpreting to do that. But on the other hand, it's very frustrating to have to speak through interpreters. It's hard for me because I'm speaking, but the people who are interpreting have an even greater job to connect the languages, so it's even more difficult for them than it is for me.
이것을 바로 통해한다는 게 얼마나 어려우신지
That's how difficult interpreting is. I want you to remember and understand that point. So please give some applause to the people who are doing the interpreting.
저는 이런 교육할 때 하나님이 얼마나 답답하실까?
When I share this kind of message with people, I think about how intensely God's heart must be feeling, how much frustrated God must be because of the fact that He cannot communicate that content with us. But in the same way, God needs an interpreter who can share His content with humanity. This is the Messiah. The Messiah is the interpreter that brings God's word to us and connects us with God's word. So today,
아버지 말씀을 전한다고
no matter, even if I share Father's word with you, but you don't hear and listen to that word, well, what point is it, even if I talk and talk and talk?
모르니까 눈만 꺼벅꺼벅 앉았다는 거지.
And sometimes, if you don't understand the meaning, you close your eyes. If I'm just talking Korean, you wouldn't understand it and you'd fall asleep. But if we have an interpreter, then that message can get across. How happy are we that we have that interpreter? So how about God? How does God feel? God needs to communicate His message to humankind. So for 4,000 years, God prepared the Messiah as His interpreter, the one who could be the channel of communication to humanity. And yet Jesus was crucified and betrayed. And then another 2,000 years was prepared for the Messiah to come. But when the Lord of the Second Advent arrived, even then again it was repeated. Christianity rejected the Messiah. And then the Messiah had to go to the crucifixion course through the prison.
일생을 닦아놓은 그 기반을 가지고 아드님은 그 기반을 터져내서 일생 동안 아버지 닦아놓은 기반보다 몇십 배 일을 할 수 있다는 것이죠.
Father emphasized that with all the foundation that Father established, when the Son is united with Father, then he can do 10 times the amount that Father did, because the foundation is established. God cannot accomplish the will alone, and the Messiah can accomplish the will alone. He needs us to be working with him. If we don't have knowledge, at least you can be an instrument. We can. So, please don't think that you are insufficient in the face of God's providence. The more insufficient that you are, the greater the things are that you can do and that you have to do. Don't become somebody who is unnecessary in God's providence. You're here because God needs you. If you don't have knowledge, then at least you have physical power. Or you can hand out pamphlets and leaflets. Whatever it is, you can bring that contribution to God's providence. At least we're not stones, right? We have something to offer more than stones. What if you're not knowledgeable? What can you do? Okay, if you have money, then you can give money. If you can work, then you give work. If I give money to someone, get them to do God's work, then when they're doing the work, then I'm doing God's work through them as well. Just become somebody who God needs and God can use. So Christianity needs to realize that mission. In the beginning, Christianity was working on that mission. But unfortunately, Satan invaded the entire foundation, even today, amongst the Unification Church members. In the beginning, they clearly understood the providence and lived for the providence. And now, with the unfolding of the providence, we come into a situation where we're liberated so much from burdens of the past and from indemnity, and yet they're forgetting the old times. Are you free of Satan? Have you accomplished victory over Satan? Satan surrendered to Father. Satan didn't just volunteer to Father voluntarily. Father created the circumstances in which Satan had no choice but to surrender to Father. And someone went to Father. When Father declared that Satan had surrendered, the person expressed to Father, "I'm so happy today, Father." And Father said, "Why?" He said, "Father, because Satan has surrendered. How joyful it is that the Satan of 6,000 years surrendered." But then Father said, the reason, it's not easy. The only reason Satan surrendered was because Father made it impossible for Satan to do any other thing. So that Satan had no choice but to surrender. How difficult would that have been? Therefore, in order to bring Satan to surrender, we have to make it so that he has no other choice to do that. We cannot leave any condition. Think about Jesus, the person who was most closest to Jesus, Peter. Satan came into Peter. Jesus had been victorious over Satan. 3 temptations, he'd been victorious. And yet, even though Jesus was victorious, Satan invaded the disciples who were close to Jesus, and through their failure, brought Jesus to the way of the cross. So, in the end, in the end, they asked Jesus, "Who are you? Are you Jesus? Are you God's son?" And Jesus answered, "Yes, I am God's son." Every time, this was his response. If Jesus said, "No, I'm not God's son," and denied that he was God's son, then all of God's providence would have become to zero. However, Jesus said, "Yes, I am God's son," and proclaimed the truth. But that's Jesus himself testifying to that. Even though Jesus himself is saying that, there needs to be somebody who provides evidence for that. There needs to be a witness to testify to that. And the person who is closest to Jesus is the one to do that. Who was that? That was Peter. Peter was meant to testify the third-party evidence in support of Jesus. And when Jesus was captured and taken, then Peter should have come forward and said, "Yes, he is the Son. He is the Messiah. I testify to him. The Messiah is the Son of God. That's the person we've been waiting for." And Peter should have put his life on the line and testified to Jesus in this way. If that had taken place, then we wouldn't have needed Christianity. Jesus would not have been crucified. The providence could have continued. But in the end, Peter didn't do that. Jesus went to the way of the cross, and therefore Christianity had to follow the same path that Jesus. Not just the disciples, all of Christianity, all of humanity need to go the same path that Jesus was going. So Jesus' prayer to avoid, the cross was not because of his own suffering, but because he knew that his disciples, that the chosen people, that all of humanity would need to go through that suffering path if Jesus went that way. At that time, what was God's heart? Looking at Jesus. God had to say to Jesus, "You being on the cross is not the problem. The Father had to come and resolve that 10 times a path, 10 times more difficult, with 10 times more agony within his heart, needed to become victory. So to do that, Father accomplished the subjugation of Satan, but we need to follow Father now through the content that he's taught us and accomplish the same thing. And the vertical 8 stages and the horizontal 8 stages, we need to bring the fruit of Father's teaching. Satan cannot accuse the foundation that Father has established. So, the Hundok textbooks, these are the things that teach us about the path to accomplish that. So we must not change the words of Father's words that he's given to us must not be changed, must not be altered in any way. Up until 5 today, is that right? We've got about 2 minutes to go. Okay, I'll just explain this basically. What about Christianity? Did it fulfill its mission? No, it didn't fulfill the mission of religion. Adam and Eve fell, losing the ideal, created in the fallen world, creating this world into a fallen world. And Satan became the owner of the world. Adam could not become a true olive tree, but became false olive trees.
세계를 수수하기 위해서 종교를 세워서
Therefore, God established religion in order to resolve this problem
이적 세계로
and bring it to God.
그래서 하나님은 여기에다가 유대교를 세우고
So God established Judaism, established Christianity,
메시아를 보내서
established the Judaism in order to send the Messiah. They gave the promise that I will send you the Messiah,
거기다가 예수를 메시아로 보냈습니다.
and sent Jesus as the Messiah. But the
메시아를
Judaism
아니라고 십자가에 못
rejected Jesus, denied that he was the Messiah, and murdered him on the cross. Jesus was resurrected,
다시
appeared to his disciples.
내가 메시아라는 것을 그때서 제자들이 깨닫고
And then, when Jesus resurrected, that was when the disciples realized clearly who he was, that he really truly was the Messiah. And this became the origins of Christianity, centering on the resurrected Jesus.
사실은 조금 전에 얘기했듯이 사울의 교회라는 방향입니다.
However, the Christianity developed based on the thought of Paul.
그래서 돌감나무를 종교를 통해서 이쪽으로 옮겨오면서
So,
돌감나무를 무슨 나무로요? 참감나무로 만들려고 했는데 참감나무로
the purpose
저 붙일 참감나무를 죽였으니
The purpose here is to transform the false olive trees into the true olive trees. And in order to do that, Christianity became aware that they had to receive the returning Lord, that the returning Lord would be the groom, and as the bride, they needed to prepare to receive the returning Lord and give everything, the entire foundation of Christianity, to the returning Lord. However, the Lord came, said, I am the Lord, I am your groom. But Christianity, in the same way as Judaism, failed. They said, no, you're supposed to be coming on the clouds. How can you be the Messiah? And in the same way, they rejected the second coming. And because of that, True Father had no choice but to establish the Unification Church in the place of Christianity, to fulfill the role of the bride, not in order to establish a different church or a new denomination, in order to create a world where religion was not necessary. That's why Father established the Unification Church and Unificationism. And therefore, so when Christianity could not fulfill their responsibility after 2,000 years, Father established the Holy Spirit Association for the unification of Christianity. Christians took that name and squashed it down and then decided to call it Unification Church, but originally it's the Holy Spirit Association for the unification of world Christianity. In other words, they're saying we're not going to become one. We're not going to become united. So did they really receive salvation from Jesus? No. So Father built the foundation and established Chonoguk, centering on the true parents. And the people who live in here have become true olive trees. That's through the blessing. And in this realm, there's no Satan in order to accomplish this world. Because this was the goal of religion, but religion was unable to fulfill it. That's why Father created the Unification Church. Father established the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification because the foundation of that ideal will of God is the family. So, what about Father explained that the Family Federation for World Peace needs to evolve into the Tribe Federation for World Peace. And therefore, the Tribe Federation for World Peace needs to advance into the stage of the National Federation of Nations for World Peace in order to restore the entire world. Then eventually the world would be restored by advancing the layers in this way. We can explain that from a theoretical viewpoint, but exactly how to accomplish it, that's what we need to study about. If we look at Romans chapter 11, verse 17, the Messiah comes and cuts down the wild olive trees and grafts them to the true olive trees. So, our second generation are in the position of true olive trees. They're even more precious than their parents. So blessed families have received the blessing from true parents, and therefore we are able to establish our families without original sin. We may have thought that our children, therefore born without original sin, would automatically become people of perfection. We just followed what Father said, but thought that our children are all automatically become perfected and complete. But that's not the reality. Many of our second gen have just flowed into the fallen world and become like people in the secular world. And so many problems have resulted because of this, because the root is because even though we've been engrafted into the true olive tree, our root is still being connected to the false olive tree, false olive root. So even though that fruit came out, which is the second generation, they still receive the influence of that fallen root. Therefore, over 3 generations, we need to accomplish God's providence. The first generation cut off the fallen root. The second generation to establish the fruit, and then with that fruit, we need to plant the seed within that fruit in the next generation, so that in that third generation, then that fruit is born from the true root. So through the first, second, third generations, this is how it is accomplished. But Father explained, even to do this process completely, it needs to go through 7 generations. It's not simple to accomplish God's will, but it must be accomplished. So, we have to believe through religion. You may believe in religion, but that's not the way to accomplish salvation. Religion is meant to prepare us to be able to receive the true parent, and then through the true parent be reborn. That's why we need the Messiah. So I'm going to finish my lecture today. Thank you very much.
Well, 1 hour for dinner, and we'll have